Mrs. Brunel Crow, step away from the desk, please. We need to talk about the PTA accounts.
Of course. What's this regarding exactly?
The transfers, the debit cards.
For 6 years, Stephanie Brunel Crow was the most trusted parent at Willowbrook Elementary. A spreadsheet with 412 rows is about to prove exactly how she used that trust.
6 years, $1,112,000.
There has to be some misunderstanding. I handled all of the accounts myself.
The spreadsheet on your laptop.
She had spent 6 years being the most reliable woman in the room. The mother who said yes when the calendar was already full. The treasurer who never missed a deadline. The volunteer photographed in the local paper 4 separate times in a single year, smiling beside the principal of Willowbrook Elementary, holding oversized novelty checks made out to the school her own 3 children attended. That morning, federal agents arrived at her home with a search warrant for $1,112,000. Every dollar of it stolen from a parent-teacher association. Every dollar of it documented in her own handwriting on a spreadsheet she had titled PTA allocation. 412 rows. She had been keeping the honest accounting of her own dishonesty on the same laptop she used to prepare the PTA's annual report. Quick question before we go any further. How well do you actually know the people who handle the money at your kid's school, your neighborhood association, the youth league down the street? Think about it for a second, then drop your answer in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. This channel covers the cases that everyone in the community knew about, but no one wanted to say out loud. Stephanie Lorraine Brunel was born in 1983 in Newton, Massachusetts, a town where the public schools were good enough that the families who could afford private school often sent their children to the public ones anyway. Her father was a partner at a Boston corporate law firm. Her mother was a high school guidance counselor in the same district Stephanie would later attend. She was the older of 2 daughters. The household ran on calendars, color-coded chore charts, and standing Sunday dinners at her grandmother's house in Wellesley. She was a strong student from the beginning. Teachers in her elementary school file noted that she consistently meets expectations, works well independently, and demonstrates initiative in group projects. By middle school, she had been placed in the accelerated math track. By high school, she was treasurer of the student council, captain of the math team, and a member of the National Honor Society. Her senior yearbook quote was a line from a Robert Frost poem. The teachers who wrote her college recommendation letters described her as organized, mature beyond her years, and the kind of student who turned in her assignments 2 days early without being asked. She enrolled at Boston College in 2001 and majored in accounting through the Carroll School of Management. She joined the Accounting Honor Society her junior year. She graduated in 2005, magna cum laude, sat for the CPA exam that summer, and started in the Boston office of one of the Big Four accounting firms 3 weeks after passing her last section. Her first office was a beige cubicle on the 32nd floor of a building overlooking the harbor. She made $48,000 in her first year. She worked 110 billable hours during her first busy season. Her annual review described her as detail-oriented, deadline-driven, and unusually willing to flag her own mistakes. She made senior associate in 3 years. By the time she was 28, she was managing federal and state returns for mid-cap industrial clients, and she had met a private equity associate named Daniel Crow at a friend's wedding in Vermont. They were married 11 months later at a coastal venue on the North Shore. She kept her maiden name on her professional licensing and credit cards, hyphenated it on everything social. Brunel Crow. It would matter later that the personal checking account she would route a portion of the diverted funds through was opened under Brunel alone. Their first child was born in 2010. She returned to the firm after a 12-week maternity leave and lasted 9 months. The second child arrived in 2012, and this time she did not go back. She told her partners she planned to consult part-time. Some of them remained on her holiday card list for years. None of them ever sent her a paying client. The third child arrived in the spring of 2014. By that summer, the family had outgrown their condo in Brookline and were looking at houses in the western suburbs. They closed on a 5-bedroom colonial on a quiet, leafy street in Willowbrook in October 2015. The eldest child started kindergarten at Willowbrook Elementary the following September. Stephanie Brunel Crow attended her first PTA general meeting 4 weeks into the school year. By her second year as a Willowbrook Elementary parent, she was chairing the fall auction subcommittee. By her third year, she was the auction chair. By the spring of 2018, the outgoing PTA treasurer announced she was moving to Wellesley and would not be standing for re-election. Stephanie Brunel Crow ran unopposed. Her nomination was seconded with applause. The vote was unanimous. She was 41 minutes into the role before she had access to the operating account. The Willowbrook Elementary Parent-Teacher Association was, on paper, a small organization. It served a single K through 5 public elementary school, with an enrollment of approximately 480 students, in an affluent western suburb of Boston, where the median household income cleared $200,000, and the parents who did not work in finance worked in biotech or law. It was registered with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts as a 501(c)(3) charitable organization. It filed an annual Form 990EZ with the IRS. It was governed, in theory, by a 4-officer board, a president, a vice president, a secretary, and a treasurer. But the Willowbrook PTA was not small in the way that most elementary school PTAs are small. Its annual fundraising revenue ranged between $380,000 and $510,000, driven by an aggressive event calendar that the parent community had built up over a decade and that they were too invested in to scale back. There was the fall auction in October, a black tie event in a rented country club ballroom with a live auctioneer and a silent auction app and a wine pool. There was the spring gala in April, with a band. There was the Readathon, the Jogathon, the Spirit Wear Sale, the Holiday Boutique, the Book Fair, the Teacher Appreciation Week, and the End-of-Year Carnival. Each event had its own budget, its own line items, its own volunteer coordinator. All of them flowed through a single operating account at a regional bank in Wellesley. The board's other officers, the president, the vice president, and the secretary, rotated annually. Term limits, written into the bylaws, capped them at 2 consecutive 1-year terms. The treasurer was different. The treasurer was the only board officer who required, in practice, a CPA license, or the equivalent expertise, because the treasurer was the only board officer who actually handled the money. The treasurer was the sole signatory on the operating account. The treasurer reconciled the books. The treasurer prepared the annual financial report presented to the membership at the June general meeting. And the treasurer's term, the bylaws stated, was indefinite, renewable each year by a vote that, in practice, no one ever opposed because no one else in the parent community was both willing to do the work and credentialed to do it. Stephanie Brunel Crow was the first treasurer in the PTA's modern history who was a credentialed CPA. She inherited the role from a woman who had been a kindergarten teacher before becoming a stay-at-home mother, and she communicated, gently and without ever quite saying it, that the bookkeeping had been informal in a way that the membership might want to professionalize. The board agreed. They were grateful. They moved the bookkeeping software to a platform she selected. They added a debit card to the account, in her name, for operational efficiency. They voted to allow her to approve reimbursements up to $2,000 without a counter signature, because requiring 2 signatures on every target run for craft supplies had been slowing the volunteers down. The trust framework was complete. Every parent in the Willowbrook Elementary community assumed, correctly, that every other parent loved the school because they loved their child. The financial controls reflected that assumption. There were no controls. The first transfer happened on a Tuesday in November 2018, 6 weeks after she took office. She moved $4,200 from the PTA operating account to a personal checking account she had opened the previous month at a different bank, in her maiden name alone, with a mailing address at a UPS store box rather than her home. In the PTA's bookkeeping software, she categorized the transfer as vendor payment, fall auction production reimbursement. There was no vendor. There had been no reimbursable expense. The $4,200 went toward a long weekend in Charleston she had been wanting to take with her husband for their 10th anniversary. Nothing happened. No one asked. The bank did not call. The board, at its December meeting, accepted her treasurer's report without questions. She had spent 6 weeks waiting for the consequence that should have followed the test. When it did not arrive, she ran the test again. By February 2019, she had moved a second transfer of $6,800, labeled Fundraising Platform Processing Fee. By April, she had used the PTA debit card to buy $1,400 of clothing at Athleta and Lululemon, and categorized the line items in the books under Volunteer Recognition Apparel. By June, when she presented her first annual financial report to the membership, she had diverted approximately $31,000 across the fiscal year, and she had built into the report a narrative, gently delivered in the third paragraph, about how rising event costs and a slightly soft donor environment had compressed net fundraising results compared to the prior year. The membership accepted the explanation. The membership re-elected her by acclamation. The mechanism evolved across the 6 years she ran the account. The first method was the direct transfer. She moved money from the PTA account to her personal Brunel account in amounts that varied between $2,000 and $12,000, labeled in the books as vendor payments, event deposit returns, or fundraising platform fees. The labels rotated. The amounts varied just enough to look like the ragged texture of real operational spending. Over 6 years, she made 87 such transfers, totaling $643,000. The second method was the PTA debit card. She used it personally at Whole Foods in Wellesley, at the Target on Route 9, at Sephora in the Natick Mall, at Athleta and Lululemon, and at the Equinox in Chestnut Hill, where she had a personal training package. Across 6 years, she ran approximately $187,000 of personal expenses through the card, categorizing every transaction in the books under teacher appreciation, event supplies, volunteer recognition, or classroom enrichment. A box of pretzels at Whole Foods became auction green room snacks. A $240 Athleta jacket became spiritwear sample. A $900 Sephora purchase became teacher gift cards. The bookkeeping software did not require receipts for any transaction under $250. Most of her individual debit transactions fell just under that threshold. The third method was the inflated event budget. The fall auction, which actually cost the PTA approximately $34,000 to put on, was budgeted at $58,000. The difference, which was $24,000, flowed to her personal account through a fabricated payment to a fictitious entity called Beacon Hill Event Production Consultants LLC. There was no Beacon Hill Event Production Consultants. There was a checking account she had opened in the entity's name, using a Massachusetts business filing she had completed online for $190. Every year for 5 years, an invoice from Beacon Hill arrived in the PTA's accounts payable. Every year she paid it. Every year no one asked who they were. The fourth method was reputational armor. She volunteered prolifically. She chaired the auction. She organized Teacher Appreciation Week. She personally delivered Starbucks gift cards to every classroom teacher on the Monday morning of the last week of school. She bought, with PTA money, the snacks for the staff lounge during state testing week. She bought, with PTA money, the framed thank you gifts for the retiring third-grade teacher. She made certain that her face, her labor, and her visible generosity were in front of the parent community so consistently that any whispered concern about the financial role she occupied would have felt, to whoever raised it, like an act of social aggression. The local paper photographed her 4 times in a single year, handing oversized novelty checks to the principal. The school newsletter quoted her 3 more times. The principal, in her first quarter address to the community, named her by name as one of the reasons Willowbrook Elementary punched above its weight on enrichment. By the spring of 2024, she had moved approximately $1,112,000 out of the Willowbrook Elementary PTA operating account and into her personal life. The diverted funds had supported 3 family vacations a year, including 10 days in Aruba in February 2022 and a week in the Amalfi Coast in June 2023. They had paid for approximately $94,000 of home decor and furniture, including a marble kitchen island and a custom built-in for the family room. They had funded approximately $112,000 of personal clothing and beauty services. And they had supported an undisclosed savings buffer that, by the time of her plea allocution the following year, sat at approximately $410,000 in a brokerage account she had described to her husband when he asked as her consulting income. He did not press. He was working 90-hour weeks in private equity. He was glad she had something of her own. In May 2024, the Willowbrook Elementary PTA elected a new president. Her name was Margaret Aoki. She had moved to Willowbrook 2 years earlier from Brooklyn. She was, by occupation, a CPA. She had spent 11 years at a Big Four accounting firm, the same firm Stephanie Brunel Crowe had once worked at, though they had never overlapped, and she had spent the 4 years before her move running internal audit for a publicly traded medical device company. Her children were in 2nd and 4th grade at Willowbrook. She had run for PTA president because she wanted to feel useful in her new town. She and the outgoing president did a transition meeting in late May at a coffee shop in the village center. The outgoing president walked her through the calendar, the volunteer roster, and the board's standing committees. When the conversation turned to financials, the outgoing president said, "Oh, Stephanie handles all of that. She gives us a great report every June. We've never had any issues." Margaret Aoki said, "I'd like to see the bank statements." The outgoing president laughed and said, "Honestly, I've never asked." Margaret Aoki did not laugh. She asked Stephanie Brunel Crowe the following week to send her the past fiscal year's monthly bank statements and the reconciliations between the statements and the bookkeeping software. The request came in a friendly email at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday. Stephanie Brunel Crowe replied that evening that she would have everything pulled together by the end of the week. The statements arrived in a shared folder on a Friday afternoon. Margaret Aoki opened them at her kitchen table at 6 p.m. with a glass of white wine and a yellow legal pad. She had been a senior auditor for 11 years. She knew what suspicious looked like. Within an hour, she had identified 3 transactions whose payees did not match anything in the PTA's vendor list. By the end of the weekend, she had reconstructed, on her yellow legal pad, 2 years of obvious irregularities. There was a vendor called Beacon Hill Event Production Consultants LLC that had been paid $24,000 a year for 5 consecutive years, and that did not appear in any of the auction night photographs, sign-in sheets, or post-event volunteer thank you emails she could find in the PTA shared drive. There were transfers, multiple per month, to an account at a bank the PTA did not use, labeled as vendor payments to entities she had never heard of. There were debit card transactions at Sephora, Athleta, and Equinox that no auditor in the world would have categorized as teacher appreciation. On Sunday night, Margaret Aoki called her husband over to the kitchen table and walked him through the legal pad. He read it twice and said, "You have to go to the police." She said, "I'm not going to the police. I'm going to the Attorney General." On Monday morning at 9:15, she called the Massachusetts Attorney General's office and asked to be transferred to the Nonprofit Organizations and Public Charities Division. She did not call Stephanie Brunel Crowe. She did not call any other member of the PTA board. She did not post in the parent Facebook group. She talked to one assistant attorney general for 43 minutes on Monday morning. By Monday afternoon, the file was open. The Massachusetts Attorney General's office contacted the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Massachusetts within 72 hours because the dollar amounts and the wire transfers across state-chartered banks pulled the case into federal jurisdiction. By the second week of July, an FBI forensic accountant named Renata Sloan had been assigned. By the end of July, she had received the PTA's complete bank records, the bookkeeping software exports, and a written affidavit from Margaret Aoki running 14 pages. Renata Sloan worked from her office at One Center Plaza in downtown Boston. She built a parallel ledger that traced every dollar of PTA revenue from the date Stephanie Brunel Crow took office in September 2018 through the most recent statement in June 2024. She matched the revenue side against ticket sales, sponsorship records, donation receipts, and the email confirmations the fundraising platform had sent the PTA after every event. She matched the expense side against the bookkeeping categorizations. By the third week of August, she had a list of 241 transactions she could not reconcile with any legitimate PTA expense. The fictitious vendor, Beacon Hill Event Production Consultants LLC, broke the case open faster than anything else. The Massachusetts Secretary of State's business registry showed the entity had been filed in September 2019 by a registered agent service in Boston. The registered agent service produced its file in response to a subpoena. The name and home address on the filing belonged to Stephanie L. Brunel Crow. The mailing address for the LLC was a UPS store box rented in her maiden name. The bank account associated with the LLC had been opened with her Social Security number. The signature on the account opening forms was hers. On October 8, 2024, a federal magistrate signed a search warrant for the Brunel Crow residence at 14 Hillcrest Lane in Willowbrook. The warrant was executed at 6:54 in the morning. Daniel Crow was on a call in his home office. The three children were eating cereal at the kitchen island. Stephanie Brunel Crow was in the master bathroom, blow-drying her hair, when the doorbell rang. The search team recovered, from the home office on the second floor, a file box containing 6 years of PTA paper banking statements organized by month and labeled in her handwriting. They recovered a personal MacBook stored on the home office desk that was logged in and unencrypted. They recovered her phone. They recovered, from the kitchen, the PTA debit card and the personal Brunel debit card stored in the same wallet in the same compartment. The MacBook contained, in a folder titled PTA Personal, a single Excel file named PTA Allocation.xlsx. The file ran to 412 rows. Column A held the date, the amount, and the PTA bookkeeping label of each diverted transaction. Column B held the personal expense it had funded. The expenses were itemized with a level of precision that, the forensic accountant later told the assistant U.S. attorney, she had never seen in any embezzlement case in her career. Aruba, Day 3, Snorkel Charter, M's birthday, Equinox membership upgrade, Kitchen Reno, Marble Samples, Sephora, Charlotte Tilbury Foundation, 2 Shades, Athleta, gift for sister, returned, cash back deposited 11/19. She had been keeping the honest accounting of her own dishonesty on the same laptop she used to prepare the PTA's annual report. Margaret Aoki, in her capacity as the new PTA president and as the original referring complainant, was permitted by the assistant U.S. attorney to review a copy of the spreadsheet after it had been processed into evidence. She read the entire 412 rows in one sitting without standing up. She would later tell the prosecution team that she had not cried at her own father's funeral, and she did not cry while reading the spreadsheet, but somewhere around row 240, a line that read, "Kindergarten teacher gift basket for Mrs. Halloran's retirement, June 2022, $340, matched against a column B entry that read, Sephora, same day, makeup haul, $338 net. She had to put the laptop down for a few minutes before she could keep going. The forensic accountant matched every row of the spreadsheet against the PTA's bank records. Every row matched. Every dollar was real. The total, when she added it up at the bottom of her own reconciliation, came to $1,112,468. The investigation is done. The indictment is coming. If you have made it this far, you already know this channel covers cases the local press tries to bury inside the community section. Hit subscribe before we get into the arrest, because what she said when the agents finally got her in a room is the part of this story that nobody in Willowbrook has stopped talking about. The interview took place at the Brunel Crow residence on the morning of the search warrant. The lead FBI special agent, Brian Maldonado, asked Stephanie Brunel Crowe if she would speak with him in the formal dining room while the search team continued upstairs. She said yes. Her husband had been escorted to the back deck with one of the other agents. Her children had been driven to a neighbor's house by a school resource officer who had been called to assist with the family logistics of the search. Special Agent Maldonado later wrote in his report that the dining room was decorated for the upcoming Halloween with a small ceramic pumpkin centerpiece on the table and an arrangement of dried wheat in a tall glass vase by the window. Stephanie Brunel Crowe was wearing a gray cashmere robe over silk pajamas. Her hair was half dried. She had not been allowed to finish her morning routine. Maldonado read her the standard Miranda warnings. She acknowledged them. She declined to call an attorney at that moment, though she said she would do so later. She sat down across from him. The other agent in the room, a forensic specialist named Talia Burke, sat to Maldonado's left and operated the recorder. Maldonado began with the spreadsheet. He had a printed copy on the dining room table between them. He turned to a tabbed page and pointed at row 38. Maldonado: "Can you tell me what this entry refers to?" Stephanie Brunel Crowe looked at the row. The label in column A read vendor payment, fall auction reimbursement, $6,800, dated November 14, 2018. The label in column B read Charleston anniversary trip, Bellman Charleston Place, 3 nights. She did not respond for approximately 11 seconds. Brunel Crowe: "I'd like to call my attorney now." Maldonado nodded. He said, "Of course." "Before you do," he said, "I want to make sure I'm reading this document correctly. This file was on a laptop in your home office. The metadata indicates you created it. The file extension and the cell structure indicate it was last modified by you on this device 4 days ago. Is that your spreadsheet?" She looked at the document. She looked at the ceramic pumpkin. She looked at Special Agent Maldonado. Brunel Crowe: "I think the best thing for me to do right now is to call my attorney." Maldonado: "I understand. One last question. The other parents at the school, the ones who trusted you with the money, is there anything you'd like me to tell them?" She looked down at the table. Brunel Crowe: "Tell them I'm sorry. Tell them I don't know how to explain it." Then she stood up and walked to the kitchen to find her phone. Stephanie L. Brunel Crowe was indicted by a federal grand jury in the District of Massachusetts on October 24, 2024, 16 days after the search of her home. The indictment charged 19 counts of wire fraud under 18 U.S.C. Section 1343, 7 counts of money laundering under 18 U.S.C. Section 1956, and 1 count of tax evasion under 26 U.S.C. Section 7201 for the unreported income generated by the diverted funds. The Massachusetts Attorney General's office filed a parallel state-level complaint charging larceny over $1,200, aggregated false entries in corporate books under Chapter 266, Section 67 of the Massachusetts General Laws, and charitable trust violations under Chapter 12, Section 8K. The state agreed to defer to the federal prosecution. Her defense attorney was a partner at a Boston white-collar boutique named Andrew Holcomb. He was experienced and expensive. He read the spreadsheet and the forensic reconciliation in his office on the 11th floor of a tower at One Post Office Square. He closed the document, looked at his client across the conference room table, and told her that her best path forward was an open plea with a full restitution commitment, a forfeiture stipulation, and the cleanest acceptance of responsibility allocution he had ever drafted. She pleaded guilty on February 12, 2025. The plea hearing was held before United States District Judge Eleanor Marchetti in the John Joseph Moakley Federal Courthouse on Fan Pier in South Boston. The hearing lasted 46 minutes. She entered her plea to wire fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion under a plea agreement that contemplated a recommended guidelines range of 51 to 63 months and a restitution order in the full amount of $1,112,000. Her plea allocution included the line that the local press would lead with for the next week. She said, "I told my husband that the money I was depositing was my consulting income. I told the PTA membership that net fundraising was down because of donor fatigue. I told myself that I would put it back when my husband's carried interest came through. None of those things were true. I knew that none of them were true. I am sorry. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for May of 2025 and would, at the time the case was being widely reported, still be pending. The Massachusetts Board of Public Accountancy initiated a license suspension proceeding immediately upon her guilty plea. The Attorney General's nonprofit division filed a permanent bar petition that would prohibit her from holding any fiduciary role in any Massachusetts charitable organization for the rest of her life. The Willowbrook Elementary PTA Board, under Margaret Aoki's leadership, voted unanimously in March 2025 to amend the bylaws to require 2 signatories on all transactions above $500, mandatory quarterly audits by an outside CPA, term limits on the treasurer position capped at 3 consecutive one-year terms, and a standing requirement that the bank statements be sent monthly to the president, vice president, and secretary, in addition to the treasurer. The PTA recovered approximately $380,000 in the year following the arrest through a community fundraising campaign launched within 10 days of the indictment and led entirely by Willowbrook Elementary parents. A retired auctioneer ran the next fall auction at no cost. A local restaurant donated the food. The principal, who had been photographed accepting the oversized novelty checks 4 times in a single year, gave a brief speech at the auction in which she said, "We are not going to teach our children that you do not trust people. We are going to teach them that you trust people, and also you check the bank statements." The school newsletter ran the line as its headline the following week. Her husband filed for divorce in March 2025. The filing was uncontested. The 3 children remained enrolled at Willowbrook Elementary. The school made no formal statement, but quietly arranged for 2 staff members to walk them in from the parking lot for the remainder of the academic year, because the volume of parent stairs in the drop-off lane had become difficult for the children to navigate. The eldest was in 5th grade. She would graduate that spring and move on to the middle school. The principal personally handed her her certificate. Margaret Aoki was re-elected as PTA president for a second term in May 2025 by a margin that the secretary recorded in the meeting minutes as every hand in the room. She gave a short acceptance speech. She said, "I did not become a CPA because I wanted to find anything like what I found in those statements. I became a CPA because the numbers are supposed to be the part of any organization you can trust. They are supposed to be the floor. If your floor is rotten, you do not have a building. We have, this year, rebuilt our floor." She received a standing ovation. The new treasurer, who had been one of the 2 CPAs to volunteer for the role in the wake of the scandal, then stood up and presented the year's first quarterly financial report. Every line item reconciled. The membership voted to accept the report. The meeting adjourned at 9:14 p.m. Stephanie L. Brunel Crow will be sentenced in federal court in Boston. The recommended range under her plea agreement is 51 to 63 months. The full restitution order of $1,112,000 will follow her until it is paid, which, given the forfeiture of her share of the marital assets, the suspension of her CPA license, and the permanent bar on charitable fiduciary roles in Massachusetts, will likely be for the rest of her working life. The spreadsheet is sealed as evidence in the case. The PTA's new bookkeeping software requires 2-factor authentication, dual signatures, and a quarterly outside audit. The bank statements are read every month by 4 people. The school newsletter still publishes a fundraising update in every Friday edition. The line that the principal gave at the auction, "Trust people and also check the bank statements," has been printed on a small wooden sign in the front office of Willowbrook Elementary, where every parent who walks in to pick up a sick child can see it. This case was disturbing, but the case on the right-hand side, the one your screen is showing you right now, is one that no parent in America will be able to look away from. Click it.